introduce you. So Glory, as well as the HBO documentary that Damien just mentioned, was key also in drawing attention to the case, getting energy toward the case, getting celebrities money and attention behind the case. So we're going to talk a little bit, but most of you have probably seen Paradise Lost, I imagine, right? That's why I wanted to ask you a little bit about, my understanding is that the directors went down to West Memphis thinking they were covering, a gory satanic murder case, teens, sort of going for the sensational thing, and that they soon realized that wasn't the story, and in fact it was, a botched trial and a witch hunt in a town. So I'd love your perspective on when they had that realization, what your role in that realization was, what that transition was like, if you were even conscious of it at the time and how it might help you.
I wasn't conscious so much of anything during the time of the trial or anything else. I was 18 years old, basically a kid myself, and you've been traumatized because your entire world, your entire life has been completely and absolutely destroyed. Everything you know has been ripped apart. You've been thrown into this hellish environment, and it's everything you can do to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So I wasn't, what was happening, I didn't register the significance of it at the time. From what I've heard, the guys that did the first documentary said the head of HBO, the documentary division, saw a very small article in the New York Times one day that said something about a satanic cult is committing human sacrifices in Arkansas. So she calls the filmmakers in and says, go to Arkansas, take your cameras, get this on film. This is going to be sensational and gruesome and bizarre, and we need to catch it. So they came down to Arkansas thinking they were going to get exactly what the newspaper article told them, that they were going to get on trial this, huge underground trailer park, Satan-worshipping carnival. And whenever they got there and they set the cameras up in the courtroom and the trial actually started, they realized that's not what this is. This is something completely and absolutely different from what we thought it was. I always tell people, cases like ours happens all the time. It happens far, far more often than you think it would. This case is nothing out of the ordinary. The only thing that was out of the ordinary about this case is that they called it on film. Most people aren't that lucky. Most people aren't that fortunate. They get sent to prison for the rest of their lives. They get sentenced to death. They get executed. And no one is ever the wiser about it. Those cameras in the courtroom were a huge part of what saved my life.
And sadly, I just got my 5-minute signal, so I only have a couple questions out of my many pages prepared for you, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. But while I have you, I need to ask you specifically about the death penalty. We're sitting in Philadelphia, which is, though we don't always like to admit it, part of Pennsylvania, right? And it's an uncomfortable truth, I've realized as a reporter here, where currently 200 people are sitting on death row. It's kind of an absurd, the first one's might sound like an absurd question, but I recently spoke with a death row exoneree who is not against the death penalty. So I'm curious what your perspectives are, and also if you identify as an activist now, or if you're, how you feel about negotiating, how much, we've talked a little bit backstage about an onslaught of invitations. Damien was telling me that he gets emails saying, if you don't help, this person in Texas is going to be executed, and that's quite a lot of pressure. So if you could talk about those things a little bit.
It is. I get, messages from people all the time saying, we need help. We have an innocent person on death row in Texas. If something isn't done, if we don't get some help, they're going to be executed. And I always think, what do you want me to do? I couldn't even save my own life, much less someone else's. Somebody asked me one time, would I be interested in getting involved in an organization or even starting an organization to change the system? And I said no. I said, think about this. It took almost 20 years of my life. It took Lori quitting her job and working full-time on this case. It took God knows how much money. It took 4 documentaries. It took 3 books. It took countless newspaper articles. It took, I don't even know how much money. It took Johnny Depp and Peter Jackson and Eddie Vedder and Margaret Cho, Henry Rollins. This is to change one case. Imagine what it would take to change the system. That's not to say it doesn't need to change. We're given this image in society that death row is full of these insane geniuses, these Hannibal Lecter types. And the reality is just the opposite. You know, the average IQ of people on death row is like 85. You have people in there, they say they don't execute what the law terms the mentally retarded or the mentally insane. They do it all the time. The prosecutor just gets somebody to come in and say, no, he's okay, go ahead. Probably the most horrific case in Arkansas was a man who had shot himself in the head and survived, but given himself a lobotomy. Whenever they got ready to execute him, they asked him what he wanted for his last meal. He says pecan pie. They bring him the pie, he eats half of it. Whenever they get ready to execute him, he wraps the other half up and says he's going to save that until after. This is the level, the mentality of the people they're putting to death. A lot of them don't even have the comprehension to know what it means that they're being killed.
My last question before opening up to the floor is, do you believe that the West Memphis police know who killed those boys?
Absolutely, 100%. I think the police know, I think the prosecutor knows, I think the attorney general knows, and I think the governor knows. The problem is, we have a documentary coming out in December. It's called West of Memphis. The prosecutor does an interview in this documentary, and he says one of his main concerns, if not the main concern he had in doing this deal that got us out of prison, was the fact that me, Jason, and Jesse collectively could have sued the state for $60 million. All of these people have used this case to boost their careers. You know, the judge went on to become a senator. The prosecutor is right now running for Congress. The attorney general is running for governor. None of these people are going to admit they made a mistake. I think with all my heart that they would have rather let the person who actually did this go free. They would have rather killed me than to have to admit they made a mistake and face the consequences of that, of not winning the next election.
Okay, well, thank you, and I think we're going to open it up now. I'm looking for who has, if there's a mic, I'm not sure, but I see a hand, we'll just start, so we don't have